just super quickly, thank you so much for the bread and for everything that came with it. I've just stuffed my face and it's so delicious. Oh my God, this bread is amazing, Nadia. You are amazing. And thank you so much for talking about it as well. Love it. Yeah, I'm just here to talk quickly. I'm Olia Hercules. I've written 3 cookbooks on kind of Eastern European and food and food from Caucasus. My latest one, Summer Kitchens, which has a rye bread recipe in it. But I've got a disclaimer. Actually, I come from the part of Ukraine, from the south, where wheat is king. It's too hot for rye to grow. So I don't actually have any family recipes, and it hasn't been cooked in our family, but it has been around. So I did grow up with rye bread, but my interest peaked actually weirdly a few years ago when I was researching Summer Kitchens, the cookbook, and also I stumbled across this book called The Russian Journals by John Steinbeck, and it's about his journey around Russia, Ukraine, and Georgia in kind of mid 1940s. He went there with Robert Capa, I think, with the photographer, and it's just an incredible book. And I've picked a couple of quotes. So this is from his journey to Ukraine. He starts in Russia, he goes to Georgia and Ukraine, and then he finishes in Russia as well. So he just describes the house first, a Ukrainian house in a village. I think they were in a village somewhere near Kiev, which is kind of like central northern Ukraine. There is a hall, which is a combination of storeroom and entrance. From there, one goes into the kitchen, a white plaster room with a brick oven and hearth for the cooking. That fireplace and oven is raised above 4 feet above the floor, and in this, the bread is baked. Flat brown cakes of Ukrainian bread, which is very good. I really love this, and I was really intrigued by his description of it as a flat brown cake of Ukrainian bread. And that's why in Summer Kitchens, I've got this guy, which is kind of like, it did, when I developed it, it did actually come out. It's the simplest recipe. It's sourdough. But it's all whole rye sourdough and some seeds and a little bit of molasses. And it's a really big ratio of kind of like crust and not much inside, but the crust is so good, like that's what you want to eat. And then there's a couple of other quotes from Steinbeck. There's this woman in the village that he keeps calling mamuchka, but I think he means mamachka, which means mommy in Russian. So he says mamuchka is a very famous cook in the village, and a very good one. Her meals were unbelievable. Supper that night began with water glasses of vodka, with pickles and home-baked black bread. He then says, he continues to describe, we began with black bread, that's another meal, pickles, tomatoes, and vodka, and then there was Ukrainian borscht with sour cream and a huge stew of meat cooked in some way so that the spices had gone into the potatoes themselves. He loved it. He ate loads, and they were it's just such an incredible story. I highly recommend that you read it. In terms of my research, so I went to North Ukraine and Northwestern Ukraine, where they do actually grow rye and make a lot of rye bread. And one really interesting thing that I've been told in this village called Kosmach, which is the biggest village in Ukraine, weirdly. It consists of 30 little villages, and the Hutsul people live here. So they are kind of like the Ukrainian Highlanders. So it's high up in the mountains. They work really hard. There's loads of shepherding going on. There's loads of polenta dishes. We know of, maybe if you've heard of banosh, which is like a really thick polenta porridge that they cook with like thick sour cream and milk. It's really rich and delicious, but they've got another like 10 varieties of kind of maize dishes that they cook. And the woman that, Hannah, that gave me quite a few recipes and told me about how they live, she told me that back in the day, the way that they used to make rye bread, they used a sourdough kind of starter. Initially it was a starter, then they'd bake the bread, and it would be normally cooked once a week to last you the whole week, because obviously you're going to be too busy during the week doing your hard work that you're doing. And what they would do, they would pinch off a little bit of the dough that's for your bread making, which contains all of the sour sourdough yeast, etc., wild yeast. And they would keep this piece of dough inside the sack with the rye flour, which I found really interesting. I haven't heard of that before. So I guess it will be encased by all of the flour and will kind of, dry out during the week, and then they would just take it out, rehydrate it, etc. And that was something interesting that I found. Another thing was the starters themselves. Obviously, rye flour would be used, but also sometimes even straw, oats, and barley. Then what else? In Western Ukraine, with the rye flour, they also used barley flour quite a lot. In Northwestern Ukraine, they used, the scalding technique that Nadia talks about. So I guess this is closer to the Belarusian border. The scalding technique is used quite a lot. And then in central Ukraine, and in Western Ukraine, they also added maize flour with the rye. And in central Ukraine, I've got just my notes here, so I don't tell you a lie, buckwheat flour was used as well. So rye and buckwheat, which is really interesting. Obviously, rye is the main kind of ingredient, and then you had little bits of whatever else would be found in the area. And actually, if it was a year with a really bad harvest, in kind of not completely starvation years, but if your harvest is bad, you would grate some beetroot or some carrots and add that. Then another thing that they used to use was nettles. And also, and I guess this is more when things were really quite bad, they would use ground up acorns and even oak bark ground up and mixed with rye flour, which is quite interesting. And obviously potatoes, that's kind of like when potatoes appeared in Ukraine, if you had potatoes, you'd make them into the bread as well. And just, I know that we're short for time, so I just want, and just one more thing I wanted to mention. So, of course, families cooked it, and every family would have their own recipe. But I think some of the most interesting rye bread recipes are kept, and it's a little bit of a secret, would be kept in monasteries. So, there would be a special bakery, and they still exist. And that's something that I would really love to do one day. God knows when that's going to be possible. But that's a really interesting thing to do, actually, to go to monasteries and find all of these really old recipes, which I'm sure have been kept for, centuries, have been passed on. And finally, just with a bit of a light kind of ending to this, just a couple of sayings, just to show you how important rye bread is in Ukraine, just like borscht is. All of the ridiculous borscht wars have been going on. But bread is also extremely important in Ukraine. And one of the sayings is "Bude hlib, bude и пісня," which means if there's bread, there will be a song, there shall be a song too. Another one is rye bread, specifically rye bread is the head of everything. Another one is Riba, hlib, neyu, sitiy in the budesh, which means fish is not bread, it won't make you full. Another one is hlib, batechko, voditsa, matushka, which means bread is your father and water is your mother. And then another good one is як ти сало не хвали, без хліба не з'їсти. However good the lardo is, you can't eat it without bread. So, I'm sure you can put it on potatoes, but for Ukrainians, you really got to have that rye bread to put your salo on to make it all work. And obviously a shot of vodka, as Steinbeck has testified. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak, and I hope you enjoyed this little introduction.
Thank you so much, Olia. That was great.